Hello and welcome to healthyhouseplants.com, where we teach you all about gardening in the great indoors. If you'd like to support our show, please use our Amazon affiliate link below. Today we're doing a check-in on this Ficus benjamina that was rooted in a prior video. I will link that video below as well as any other videos that would help you with this process. Okay, so this is the mother plant that we took these cuttings from about 3 months ago, as mentioned. They have started growth over the last month or so, probably 6 weeks. That indicated to me that they were well rooted and they were established and growing. So now it is time to go ahead and put them into a container so that they can continue to grow. I think that this one bigger one is going to be the real viable one to pot up. This other one may not have enough roots yet, but we're going to find out in a minute. So anyway, this is the way you can do hard stem, what's called hard stemmed cuttings. So for instance, Ficus benjamina has a hard stem, especially it gets harder as it ages, but this is the method, and we use rooting hormone to do this, to get this to root, and eventually this little guy will be a nice big Ficus benjamina like this, and even much bigger later on. Okay, so for now we're going to take this out, see what kind of roots we got, and then I have a couple different size pots here that I have put some moist soil into to be able to pot this plant up. So here we go. We're going to loosen this. This was the soil in here that was used it's a rooting medium, so it is not for long-term growth of the plants. So you do eventually, when you use this rooting medium, and I do have a video on how to make it, including the recipe for it. When you use a rooting medium, you use it to root. You don't use it for continual growth. Now this has been in here for a while as it rooted, of course, but eventually you need to get it out and get it into some good potting soil that will then give the plant plenty of nutrients for growth. So any way you can to get the plant out of the pot as gently as possible so that you do not harm any roots. It's always difficult to know, really. You need to kind of have different size pots on hand because it's always difficult to know really until you get the plant out even how many roots you have. And I'm looking and I'm seeing a good amount of roots here. So it could be that I don't even have big enough pots for the repotting of this guy. I will soon find out. And if that's the case, I will, have to go get another pot, but we will find out soon enough. Okay, so if you see in the other video, there were absolutely no roots on this plant before, right? Okay, so now, as mentioned, very, very gently, you need to check out that root system. And wow, look at that. That is a really, really nice root system we got going on here. I definitely underestimated the size pot I'm going to need. Although I don't want to go too big of a pot because there's not a lot of above ground growth yet, but you can see here, looking real good here, and ready for some nice repotting. So I'm feeling really, really happy about this. I feel like I managed to develop a really healthy root system. This plant has really, really good chance of surviving, doing really well, thriving actually fairly quickly with such an extensive root system. So what I'm going to do now is I am going, because these pots are way too small, however, you don't want to go too big, as I mentioned, but I'm going to go find the perfect size pot for this guy right now, and I will be back to pot him up. Okay, I'm back now with the correct size pot. One thing to keep in mind too with the rooting medium is you reuse it a few times. I would suggest rinsing it well with water, leaching it out with water, run several, maybe half gallon of water through it to rinse it of any residual rooting hormone. And also I didn't mention, but I did fertilize this twice once I knew that there were roots in there. When I had the top growth, I started fertilizing a little bit to get it some nutrients, so that it could then do well when I repotted it, be ready for repotting it to get some nitrogen to the leaves and that sort of thing. I'll put a link below for the fertilizers that I used in that process as well. Okay, so as mentioned, not necessary. After you rinse it, use it again. Okay, so here we go. This is the pot that I chose. Now, you saw a lot of roots and you may be thinking, wow, that's kind of small, this pot still. It is a little bit bigger than those other two pots, quite a bit bigger than the little mini pot that I had gotten there. Now, the thing is as I always talk about, you don't want too big of a pot. So even for this little guy here, what you want to do is you want to make sure that what you want is 2/3 plant to 1/3 pot. Well, this is a little bit more like half and half because there was a lot of roots, right? So another thing to keep in mind, I have a video on the plant to pot ratio. I also have a video on the roots to pot ratio. So what you want in the pot itself for the roots is 2/3 roots and 1/3 potting soil. So that's really what's going on in here. And the reason why you don't want too much soil in here, lots of wet soil, is it's like you're planting in a lake and you can quickly get root rot. So even with a fairly nice, like you saw that nice healthy root system, we don't want to put it in too big of a pot with lots of wet, and then it gets root rot, right? So what we want is something where it has some soil, definitely has some soil to work with and to grow more roots in, and also to get the top growth going. So a couple months from now, when I have a more top growth, then I will be moving it into the next size pot. But you want to do it gradually. You don't want to go crazy and think I'm going to put it in this big, huge pot and everything's going to go crazy, because it will actually slow down growth rather than speed up growth. The right size pot, it will grow quickly. Okay, so I'm gonna put a little bit more in here, and I did in this is a ProMix BX, what I use for a lot of my houseplants. I'll put a link below for this soil as well. It's water retentive, yet it also drains well, which is really, really important. And I did add a little extra worm compost to this. So even though at this point we don't want to essentially fertilize right now because we are transplanting, and you don't want to fertilize when you transplant, generally speaking, because that can cause a shock, transplant shock. It can lead to transplant shock. But it doesn't hurt to put a little worm compost in when you're repotting, because worm compost has a lot of really important micronutrients that will help the plant grow well, and it will also help the plant absorb other fertilizers once we fertilize with a more complete fertilizer. And it will also feed the soil, which is what you want, really healthy soil for your new plant as well. So it's a really nice additive, and it will also help the plant avoid transplant shock. So lots of really good reasons to add that worm compost, and I'll put a link below for some worm compost as well. Okay, so here we go. Got it filled in, looking really nice. Excited to know that we have some really, really healthy roots down below. And you want to, as I mentioned, I have a repotting playlist. And during the repotting parts, and anytime I do repot, you want about 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch inside the lip there, so that when you water, the water doesn't flow over, because if it's the soil's too high, you're just going to end up with water all over your floor or your table, rather than where you want it, which is in the soil. Okay, so just about done here. Got a nice, so even though, like I said, this may not look like all that big of a pot, I've added quite a bit of soil. I had the soil that was in both of those containers, plus there was another good bit of soil in here as well. I'm using all of that. Okay, and then anytime you do repot, you do want to water with warm water afterwards. till the water runs out the bottom. And then I am not going to be watering this plant for quite a while. As it acclimates and it starts growing, the roots start growing, and then it starts to grow more foliage, then the soil will dry out, and then it will be time to water. But I won't water until the moisture meter hits about a 4. 4 usually is a good rule of thumb for most plants, right before it hits the 3, which is dry. So right now I can guarantee you if I put a moisture meter in here, it's going to be on the 10, which is really, really wet. So you do want to, after repotting any house plants, especially little very sensitive plants that are newly transplanted from cuttings that when you've rooted them, you want to make sure not to overwater. So there you go. I'm excited about this plant. We will check back in after a few months, and see how he's growing and how he's doing, maybe before his next potting up possibly. And so we officially have a mother and a baby plant from this mother plant, this Ficus benjamina. And I do have a care video on growing Ficus benjamina as well. Thank you for stopping by today. Please leave any comments about any indoor gardening tutorials you'd like to see. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video. And please check the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos are released.